Abandoned, scarred, and left to die, a former police dog limps onto a lonely farmer's land. Weeks of care and patience reveal more than healing. They uncover a bond stronger than any past mission. 1 month later, what this wounded K9 does changes both their lives forever, proving that love and trust can restore even the most broken soul. Before we move on, if you're an animal lover, tap subscribe. It's completely free, and every click inspires us to keep sharing the stories that truly touch the heart and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. The sun had barely crested the horizon over the rolling fields of Montana when Jake Miller, a solitary farmer in his late 40s, made his usual rounds. His pickup rumbled across the gravel driveway, the engine's low hum blending with the morning chorus of birds. Mist clung to the low hills like a thin veil, and the air smelled of damp earth and hay. Jake had lived alone for years, his days consumed by the rhythm of planting, feeding, and repairing, the steady, predictable life of a man deeply rooted in the land. But today, something unusual disrupted that rhythm. A faint, pitiful whimper reached his ears, carried on the cold morning wind. Jake slowed the truck near the edge of a wooded hollow, eyes scanning the foggy tree-line. At first, he saw only the twisted shapes of fallen branches and scattered leaves, but then movement caught his eye. A dog emerged, limping heavily, its fur matted with mud, dried blood caking patches of skin. Its ribs were visible beneath thin, torn hide, and a hollow, haunted look lingered in its amber eyes. Jake's heart clenched. He had seen strays before, but nothing like this. Not a dog that carried the weight of terror and pain in every cautious step. He killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on frost-hardened grass. The dog froze, ears flicking, muscles taut. It wasn't fear alone. It was wariness born of experience, of something far worse than neglect. Jake knelt slowly, his hands visible and empty, murmuring a soft, steady rhythm. "It's okay, boy, it's okay." The dog hesitated, head low, but did not bolt. Its eyes flicked between Jake and the surrounding woods, calculating, assessing. Then, with a reluctant shuffle, it limped closer, drawn by some instinctive sense that this man, tall, steady, grounded, posed no threat. Jake noticed the heavy scars along its shoulders and back, the remnants of battle etched into flesh and memory. There was no collar, no sign of ownership, and yet a certain posture suggested training, precise, disciplined, alert. Without realizing it, Jake had begun speaking to the dog as though it were an old friend. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The dog tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging his words, its amber eyes glimmering with a flicker of recognition. He reached slowly, letting his palm hover near the animal's muzzle. The dog sniffed, shivered, and then, ever so carefully, allowed the touch. Its skin was raw, hair patchy, but there was strength in its frame, a coiled resilience that had survived far too much. Jake knew he couldn't leave it here. The nearest town was miles away, and even if someone recognized the animal, who would help it properly? He dug an old blanket from the truck and wrapped the dog gently, careful not to aggravate any wounds. The dog leaned into him, a fragile trust forming in that quiet, misty morning. When he lifted it into the cab, the dog braced itself, muscles tense but obedient. Jake named it Ranger, a nod to its disciplined demeanor, the kind of name that honored courage and loyalty. Back at the farm, Jake moved quickly but cautiously. He had an old shed converted into a temporary kennel, warm and sheltered. Ranger slumped onto fresh straw, his body trembling. Jake fetched a bucket of lukewarm water, gently cleaning the worst of the dried blood, inspecting each wound. They were numerous: scars, open abrasions, and the faint, unmistakable signs of chemical burns in one patch along the dog's flank. Ranger flinched at every touch, low growls vibrating in his throat, but he did not attempt to bite. It was the first sign that despite everything, this dog had not lost all trust. Evening came, painting the fields in burnt orange and purple. Ranger lay curled at the edge of the straw, eyes half closed but alert, ears twitching at every sound. Jake sat beside him, exhausted but determined, running his fingers gently through what remained of his fur. "We'll get you fixed up," he whispered. "No more running, no more hiding. You're safe here." In the silence that followed, a faint sound reached Jake. The soft, rhythmic click of Ranger's jaw. A subtle acknowledgement that perhaps, for the first time in months, maybe years, this dog was beginning to hope again. That night, Jake lay awake in the old farmhouse, thinking of the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Ranger's wounds were more than physical. The dog carried scars of a lifetime of service, betrayal, and neglect. But Jake had learned something about resilience from the land he loved, and now that resilience had a living, breathing companion to nurture. As the wind rustled through the tall grass outside, Ranger shifted slightly, eyes scanning the moonlit yard. The instinct, honed by years of police service, had not faded. Jake noticed the tension and whispered, "We'll face it together, partner." Ranger's tail gave the faintest wag, almost imperceptible, but enough to promise that a bond was forming. A bond that would carry them both through the challenges to come. And somewhere in the shadows of the farm, the first threads of trust and purpose began to weave between man and dog. Threads that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the dusty windows of the farmhouse, illuminating Ranger's tense form as he stood awkwardly on the straw. Jake had spent hours preparing for this moment, setting up a small area in the barn with fresh blankets, water, and food that might tempt a dog who hadn't eaten well in days. Ranger's amber eyes followed every movement, calculating, measuring the man's intentions. Trust, Jake realized, would come slowly, perhaps in inches and careful glances, rather than leaps of faith. Jake approached cautiously, carrying a bowl of warm broth. "Come on, Ranger, try a little," he coaxed, lowering himself to the dog's level. Ranger's nose twitched, and after a few tentative sniffs, he lapped at the liquid, careful and deliberate. Jake noted the way his ribs flexed as he drank, each breath a reminder of how much neglect the dog had endured. When the bowl was empty, Ranger lifted his head, amber eyes meeting Jake's. In that silent gaze, a fragile understanding passed between them, one of necessity, respect, and unspoken companionship. The following days were a mix of quiet routines and careful interventions. Jake brought out old first aid supplies he'd kept from his father's ranching days: disinfectants, antiseptics, and bandages. Ranger tolerated the cleaning and dressing of his wounds with a quiet dignity that spoke of a life in service. There was pain, certainly, whimpers that tugged at Jake's heart, but no panic, no aggression. Jake marveled at the dog's resilience, imagining the missions, the streets, the confrontations it must have endured. Each scar told a story he could only guess at, but the discipline and awareness in Ranger's every movement were unmistakable. Jake began small exercises to help Ranger regain strength. Short walks through the fields, gentle encouragement to trot over uneven ground, and slow climbs up the barn's ramps. The dog's muscles, long dormant or abused, protested at first, but gradually, coordination and confidence returned. Ranger's ears flicked at every noise: the rustle of wind through the corn, the distant cawing of crows, and the creak of the old farmhouse door. Every sound was cataloged, analyzed, and absorbed, the instincts of a former police dog, still sharp and alert. While Ranger healed physically, Jake couldn't ignore the shadows in the dog's eyes. Flinches at sudden movements, avoidance of raised hands, and a constant scanning of his surroundings indicated trauma that no ointment or bandage could soothe. Jake sought advice from the local vet, who confirmed what Jake had suspected. Ranger needed more than medical care. He needed stability, patience, and the reassurance that danger would no longer dictate his life. Evenings became a time of tentative connection. Jake would sit near the barn's fire, reading aloud from old Western novels or recounting tales of ranch life, letting his voice become a comforting constant. Ranger, initially wary, would inch closer over time, eventually resting his head on Jake's knee or leaning against his side. Every day, the bond deepened, the dog's posture relaxing slightly, tail flicking occasionally in unguarded curiosity. The farm, once silent except for the mechanical rhythm of chores, now held the soft, cautious heartbeat of two lives intertwining. One afternoon, While Jake repaired a fence along the northern pasture, Ranger followed closely, eyes alert, ears pricked. Suddenly, the dog froze, hackles rising ever so slightly. A distant figure, moving along the edge of the property, caught Ranger's attention. He barked once, low, deliberate, and Jake stopped, studying the horizon. No threat presented itself, but the instinctive vigilance reminded Jake that Ranger's training ran deep. This was no ordinary dog. This was a survivor, a guardian, and perhaps something more. Jake noticed small quirks that confirmed Ranger's background. Methodical patrolling of the barn perimeter, pausing at every corner to sniff the air, an uncanny awareness of sudden noises, and the way he responded to even subtle gestures, almost as if reading Jake's mind. The farmer marveled at these signs. Here was a creature who had once worked alongside officers, faced danger without hesitation, and now, covered in wounds and neglect, was beginning to trust again. As days passed, Ranger's wounds healed, leaving pale scars that mapped the story of his survival. But Jake knew the emotional scars would linger longer. He learned to read the subtle signs, a flick of the tail, a tilt of the head, the tension in his shoulders. And Ranger, in turn, learned that Jake was not a threat, that he would not abandon him, that this farm could become more than just a refuge. It could become a home. By the end of the month, Ranger could walk alongside Jake for miles without hesitation, his amber eyes bright with curiosity rather than fear. Yet there remained a depth of wariness, a shadow in his gaze, as if the dog carried knowledge of dangers that Jake could not imagine. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ranger stood at the edge of the pasture, scanning the horizon with a quiet intensity. Jake approached, placing a hand on his flank. "You're stronger now, Ranger." "Stronger than I imagined," he whispered. The dog looked back, ears slightly forward, then returned his gaze to the distance, attentive but calm. Jake didn't know what lay ahead, but he sensed that Ranger's past, his experiences, and his training were only the beginning of a journey far greater than mere recovery. Something was stirring in the dog, something Jake could not yet name, a purpose that would soon reveal itself, binding them together in ways neither of them expected. And as night fell over the quiet Montana farm, the two companions settled under the stars, one man, one dog, both ready to face whatever came next, together. The following week brought a new rhythm to farm life. Ranger patrolled the barn and fields with an alertness that never waned, his amber eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. Jake marveled at the dog's intelligence, the way he anticipated shifts in the wind, the sounds of approaching animals, even the subtle change in light as clouds moved across the sun. It was more than instinct. It was training, honed by years of service, now directed at protecting a place that had become more than a simple refuge. One afternoon, as Jake worked in the northern pasture, Ranger suddenly stiffened. His ears pricked, tail raised, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Jake froze, following the dog's gaze to the tree line at the edge of the property. A figure emerged, tall, carrying equipment that glinted in the sunlight. Ranger barked sharply, then ran a short circle around Jake, herding him toward the farmhouse as if insisting they retreat to safety. Jake's pulse quickened. He didn't know this person, but Ranger's reaction left no doubt. This was a potential threat. "Easy, boy," Jake whispered, though his own body tensed. Ranger's bark sounded again, insistent, and he positioned himself between Jake and the approaching figure. The stranger stopped at the edge of the trees, hands raised in what seemed like a friendly gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man called, voice calm but firm. Jake's eyes narrowed, but Ranger's posture relaxed just slightly, still cautious, but less defensive. The man continued, "Name's Dr. Harlan. I study canine behavior. I've been tracking a former police dog fitting his description. I need to speak with him, and you, if I may." Jake studied the man, uncertain. Ranger stayed by his side, scanning every movement. The scars on the dog's body twitched slightly, as if recalling painful memories. Jake knew this encounter could go either way. Ranger's loyalty was absolute, but his instincts were razor-sharp. Slowly, Jake stepped forward, keeping one hand near his pocket where he kept Ranger's treats. "You're looking for him?" Jake asked cautiously. Ranger's ears flicked toward him as if acknowledging the question. Then he remained fixed on Dr. Harlan. The scientist nodded. Yes, I've been following reports of a wounded former police dog rescued on this property. His record shows exceptional service and unusual behavioral tendencies that could be valuable for rehabilitation programs. Jake frowned. Rehabilitation? He's recovering here. He's safe. Ranger growled softly, as if adding emphasis to his owner's words. Harlan raised his hands again. I understand. I'm not here to take him away. I want to observe, to learn, perhaps even help him reach his full potential, if he trusts us. Ranger's growl deepened, but it was not pure aggression. It was caution, assessment. Jake stepped closer, placing a hand on Ranger's flank. You decide, Ranger. If you let him in, it's okay. But I'm not forcing you. The dog's amber eyes met Jake's for a moment, then flicked to Dr. Harlan. Slowly, Ranger stepped aside, still tense, signaling that he would allow Harlan to approach, but only under his rules. Harlan knelt slowly, speaking in soft, measured tones. Ranger, I know you've been through a lot. I'm not here to hurt you. Just let me observe. Ranger tilted his head, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air, analyzing every detail. Then, after a long pause, he lay down, body low but relaxed enough to indicate a tentative trust. Over the next few hours, Harlan worked quietly, setting up simple observation equipment. He recorded Ranger's movements, reactions to stimuli, and interactions with Jake. The dog's resilience amazed him. The careful way he approached new objects, his ability to remain calm under subtle stress, and the unspoken bond with Jake, who acted as both protector and partner. Harlan whispered occasional observations to Jake, praising Ranger's patience and intelligence, but carefully respecting the dog's space. That evening, as Harlan packed up, he turned to Jake. This dog, he's not just a survivor. He's remarkable. He could excel in search and rescue, therapy programs, or advanced detection work. But he's loyal to you. That loyalty, it's rare. He chooses his human. Jake nodded, glancing at Ranger, who sat quietly, ears twitching at every sound of the farmhouse settling in for the night. The next morning brought another surprise. Ranger led Jake to the western edge of the property, where a shallow stream meandered past a grove of pines. The dog stopped suddenly, sniffing the air, then pawed at the soil near a fallen log. Curious, Jake knelt, uncovering a rusted, partially buried box. Inside were remnants of old police gear, a badge, a collar, and a small journal. Ranger nudged it with his nose, as if insisting Jake examine it. The journal contained entries that confirmed Ranger's past, the missions he had completed, the injuries sustained, and the handlers who had relied on his unique instincts. Jake read through the lines carefully, a sense of awe washing over him. This dog had lived a life of purpose, discipline, and danger, and yet, here he was, slowly recovering on a quiet Montana farm. Jake looked down at Ranger, who sat watching him intently. You've done more than survive, Jake said softly. You've earned this life, and maybe even something more. Ranger's tail wagged once, subtle, measured, as if acknowledging the promise of the future. But as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the farm, both Jake and Ranger sensed it. The dog's past was not entirely behind them. There were instincts, skills, and a sense of duty still very much alive. And soon, circumstances would test those abilities in ways neither had yet imagined. Something was coming, a situation that would call on Ranger's training, his courage, and the trust he had placed in Jake. And when it arrived, the quiet Montana farm would no longer be just a sanctuary. It would become a stage for a remarkable story of resilience, partnership, and unexpected heroism. The following morning, the farm seemed calm, almost deceptively peaceful. The mist hovered over the fields, softening the outlines of fences and trees. Ranger moved silently between the pasture and barn, his senses alert to every sound. The wind rustling through the grass, distant birds calling, and the faintest vibrations from the dirt beneath his paws. Jake watched him, realizing that the dog's vigilance had become instinctive. Even in safety, Ranger remained a guardian. Suddenly, A vehicle approached along the gravel road leading to the farm. It was unmarked, old, and raised a flicker of concern in Jake. Ranger stiffened immediately, tail rising, ears forward. He growled low, a sound that vibrated through his chest. Jake raised a hand, signaling the dog to stay calm, but he didn't step forward. "Easy, Ranger. Let's see who it is first." The vehicle slowed and a man stepped out, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a representative from a local agricultural survey office, noting that he had a routine inspection to perform. Jake squinted, sensing something off. Ranger didn't relax. The dog's nose twitched as he sniffed the air, circling subtly around the visitor, gauging intent. There was nothing overtly threatening, yet Ranger's instincts told him to proceed with caution. "Thanks for letting me on the property," the man said with a polite smile, holding up his clipboard. "Just some questions about livestock and crop yields." "Standard procedure." Jake nodded, but he kept his hand near Ranger's collar, just in case. Ranger moved closer to him, shoulders brushing against Jake's side. His presence was both comforting and intimidating. The surveyor began asking questions, jotting notes on his clipboard. But Ranger, patient yet unyielding, occasionally stepped between Jake and the stranger, subtly signaling that any sudden movement would be met with attention. Jake realized then that Ranger wasn't just reactive. He was calculating, assessing the potential risk while maintaining control. It was an instinct honed by years of police work. As the inspection continued, a sudden sound, a vehicle door slamming in the distance, drew Ranger's focus instantly. He bolted toward the tree line, disappearing from view for a moment before returning with deliberate precision. He had located the source, assessed it, and ensured it posed no threat before returning to Jake's side. The surveyor looked impressed and slightly unsettled. "He's highly trained, isn't he?" he asked. Jake simply nodded. Once the man left, Ranger's energy shifted. He trotted back to the barn, eyes scanning the horizon, ears perked. It was clear he had been evaluating the day, cataloging new experiences and potential hazards. Jake realized that Ranger's recovery wasn't just physical, it was mental. The dog had learned to adapt, to navigate a new environment while maintaining the instincts that had once saved lives. That afternoon, Jake introduced Ranger to some of the farm's newer challenges. A litter of orphan lambs had been delivered to the barn by a neighboring rancher, and they required constant attention. Ranger approached them cautiously at first, sniffing and observing their behavior. Then, with deliberate care, he positioned himself nearby, keeping watch as the lambs explored their temporary enclosure. Every movement he made was protective, yet gentle, revealing a depth of awareness and patience that went far beyond ordinary dogs. Later, as Jake repaired a section of fencing near the northern pasture, Ranger accompanied him, checking every corner, scanning the tree lines, and alerting Jake to minor disturbances: a rabbit darting across the field, a branch swaying oddly in the wind. It was as if the dog had adopted a dual role: companion and guardian, protector of both Jake and the land itself. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ranger led Jake to a secluded area near the stream. The dog paused, then pawed at the ground, uncovering another partially buried object, this time a small metal canister containing first aid supplies from his past service. It was a reminder of Ranger's history, the battles he had faced, and the resilience that had brought him here. Jake knelt, brushing dirt from the canister. "You've carried so much already, Ranger, and now you're teaching me how to be patient, how to see everything, not just the obvious." Ranger pressed against his leg, silent but affirming, a bond reinforced through trust and shared experience. As night fell, a distant howl echoed from the mountains, sharp and haunting. Ranger's ears twitched, and he raised his head to listen, then returned to Jake's side, tail low but alert. The farm was safe, for now. But the encounter with the stranger, the unexpected test of patience and vigilance, had shown Jake that Ranger's skills were not just for show. The dog's instincts and training could be called upon at any moment, and Jake knew the time would come when they would be tested in ways neither could fully anticipate. The following week brought a tension that Jake hadn't anticipated. Ranger had settled into a routine, yet his senses remained sharp, constantly surveying the farm and its surroundings. Jake understood that the dog's past experiences had left him hyper-aware. Any unusual sound or scent could trigger instinctive reactions. It was a reminder that Ranger's recovery, while remarkable, was ongoing. Late one afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the pasture, a new scent drifted through the air. Ranger froze mid-step, ears erect, nostrils flaring. He bolted toward the tree line, returning moments later with a single, unmistakable warning bark. Jake followed, spotting a figure moving along the ridge in the distance. A hunter, or perhaps someone more deliberate, making their way toward the farm. Ranger positioned himself between Jake and the figure, low growls vibrating through his chest, a silent warning that any approach would not go unnoticed. Jake raised his hands, signaling calm, and stepped closer to Ranger. "Easy, buddy. Let's see what this is about." The figure paused, clearly noticing the dog's unwavering focus. Ranger's body language was clear, no sudden moves, no threats unless necessary. He had learned to assess before acting, a skill honed in police work and refined during his month on the farm. The visitor finally called out, "Evening. I'm just here to check the property lines. Heard about your farm from a friend in town." His voice was casual, but Jake's gut told him to remain cautious. Ranger's gaze never wavered. Jake could feel the dog's confidence as a shield, protecting the boundaries of their home. Ranger's training was evident. His patience and judgment were as precise as any officer's. Over the next hour, Ranger shadowed the visitor, allowing Jake to converse at a safe distance. Every step the man took was measured against Ranger's silent evaluation. The dog's behavior communicated to Jake when it was safe to speak, when to pause, and when the situation required alertness. By the end of the visit, the stranger left without incident, unaware that he had been tested more rigorously than he realized. That night, Jake sat on the porch, the sky a tapestry of stars, Ranger lying beside him. The dog's breathing was steady, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds. "You've done more than survive, Ranger. You've adapted. You've taught me what vigilance and patience really mean," Jake whispered. Ranger pressed his head into Jake's lap, as if acknowledging the weight of those words. The next day brought another, more deliberate challenge. A fox had been spotted near the henhouse, stealthy and brazen. Ranger immediately detected the intruder, bounding silently through the underbrush, muscles coiled for action. He didn't rush. He circled, assessing the fox's behavior, calculating a path that would protect the hens without unnecessary aggression. When he finally engaged, it was decisive yet controlled, a quick chase that sent the fox fleeing, unharmed but deterred. Jake watched amazed. Ranger's approach wasn't just instinct. It was strategy, a combination of intuition, training, and experience. Every movement was deliberate. It was a dance between protection and restraint, and it demonstrated a depth of intelligence that few animals could match. Ranger had become not just a guardian of the farm, but a mentor of sorts, showing Jake how to anticipate, evaluate, and act with precision. Over the next few weeks, Ranger's confidence grew. He patrolled the fields, investigated new sounds, and responded to every potential threat with a calculated mix of caution and assertiveness. He guided Jake in recognizing patterns, understanding subtle cues in the environment, and interpreting the behavior of other animals. Together, they formed a rhythm, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. One morning, Sarah arrived with a set of small cameras she had arranged around the property to monitor wildlife and security. Ranger immediately examined them, sniffing and pawing gently at the corners, clearly evaluating their placement. Jake realized the dog wasn't just adjusting to humans. He was actively contributing to the farm's management, incorporating his instincts into their daily life. Later, Jake discovered another aspect of Ranger's recovery. When he tended to the barn, Ranger watched patiently, but if any tool slipped or a gate didn't latch properly, the dog would intervene, nudging the item back into place or guiding Jake to notice the problem. It was as if Ranger had internalized responsibility for the farm in its entirety, combining his old training with a new sense of duty. By the end of the month, Ranger's wounds had healed, both physically and emotionally. His coat had grown back, glossy and healthy, his eyes bright and alert. Yet more importantly, his bond with Jake was profound, built not on fear or obedience, but on respect, trust, and shared purpose. They were partners now, equals in a quiet mission to protect the farm and each other. The morning light stretched across the farm, golden and warm. A month had passed since Ranger had first limped onto Jake's land, broken and scarred, a shadow of the police dog he once was. Now, standing tall at the edge of the pasture, Ranger looked like an entirely different creature. His coat shone with health, his eyes burned with focus, and his muscles carried renewed strength. But the greatest change wasn't physical. It was the sense of belonging that radiated from him. Jake leaned on the porch railing, coffee mug in hand, watching as Ranger moved along the fence line. The dog's steps were confident, his nose twitching at the breeze, his ears turning toward faint sounds. He no longer wandered like an outsider. He patrolled like a guardian who had found his post. The farm had become his territory, his mission, his home. Sarah pulled up in her truck and waved as she hopped out, holding a folder of papers. "You're not going to believe this," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "I got a call from one of my contacts in town. They've been tracking down Ranger's old unit. Turns out, the department thought he'd been retired and rehomed officially. But somewhere along the line, he got lost in the system, abandoned." Jake frowned. Lost in the system? After everything he gave them, his hand tightened on his mug. Ranger trotted over, sensing the tension, and pressed against Jake's leg. Sarah nodded. They didn't mean for this to happen. But still they thought he was gone. The handler he served with was injured and retired too. Ranger just slipped through the cracks. Jake looked down at the German shepherd, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. "Well, he's not lost anymore. He's got a home here." Ranger wagged his tail once, as if agreeing. That afternoon, Jake took Ranger out to the far fields. Together, they repaired fences, checked on livestock, and surveyed the land. But then, just as they were returning, a sudden commotion erupted near the barn. Chickens squawked in alarm. Jake dropped his tools, but Ranger was already in motion, sprinting with speed and precision. A large coyote had breached the fence, its teeth bared as it lunged toward the flock. Ranger intercepted, body low, muscles rippling with controlled power. He didn't attack recklessly. He maneuvered, driving the coyote away with calculated force. The predator, sensing Ranger's dominance, bolted into the woods, leaving the hens safe and unharmed. Jake ran up, chest heaving. Ranger stood tall, ears pricked, breathing hard but steady. The once wounded, abandoned dog had reclaimed his purpose. Jake knelt, placing both hands on Ranger's shoulders. "You're more than a protector, boy. You're family now. This farm is as much yours as it is mine." That evening, Sarah returned with news. "The department offered to take him back," she said gently. "They said he could be honored, maybe even live out his days with other retired K9s. But Jake, it's your choice." "And his." Jake looked at Ranger. The dog met his eyes, unwavering, and leaned closer. The answer was clear. "He's staying," Jake said firmly. "He's earned his peace here. And besides, I need him as much as he needs me." Sarah smiled softly. Then it settled. Ranger has a new badge now, not of the police, but of this land, this family. As night fell, Jake and Ranger sat together on the porch. The cicadas sang, and the stars spread wide overhead. Jake reached down, running his hand along Ranger's back, feeling the strength and warmth there. "You were left behind once," Jake whispered, "but not again. Not ever." Ranger shifted, resting his head on Jake's knee. His breathing slowed, steady and calm. The scars on his body told of battles fought, but his spirit carried something far greater: resilience, loyalty, and the power of starting over. In the distance, the coyotes howled again. Ranger lifted his head, ears sharp, eyes glowing in the dark. This time, though, he didn't move to chase them. He simply listened, secure in the knowledge that his place was here, beside the man who had given him not just shelter, but a purpose renewed. The farm was safe. The wounds had healed. And together, Jake and Ranger looked toward the future, not as farmer and dog, but as partners, as family, as proof that even the most broken souls can find their way home again.